Certainly. My name is Dan McKnight, and I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman and committee, to testify before you in support of Representative Aylward's legislation, which is commonly referred to as Defend the Guard. South Dakota ranks as the #1 most veteran-friendly state in the entire nation. And in my state where I come from, Idaho, we try to model ourselves on what you've done here for veteran-friendly services, including your tax breaks and your education credits and things like that. And so I want to thank you for that measure, that steps that you've taken to be veteran-friendly. I served in the United States military. I was in the Marine Corps, the Army, and the Idaho Army National Guard. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2005, 6, and 7. While I was there, I was injured and I was sent home. And after multiple shoulder surgeries, I decided it was no longer viable for me to continue serving my country, a country that I have a deep and burning passion for, and a constitution that was created in a way that I respect and I revere. After I left the military, I watched my brothers and sisters in arms go back to deploy from the National Guard 6, 7, even 8 times for one of my buddies. 8 times from the National Guard. He's been deployed to a war that's never been declared. In the past 24 months, we started an organization called BringOurTroopsHome.us. It's a group of conservative, right-of-center veterans, what might be commonly referred to as deplorables, who are actively trying to encourage Congress to reclaim their war power authority from the executive branch. It's a power they've given away freely for the last 79 years. I'm not here as a member of the organization, though. I'm here today as a private citizen and as a veteran and to speak in support of the Defend the Guard legislation. As a global war on terror veteran, I feel it's my job, my duty, my obligation to stand up and say that it's enough of the abdication of power in Congress. Our founding fathers had it right when they created our government. They created a federalist form of government where the power comes from the people to the state and the state to the federal government. And currently in our society, everything is upside down and backwards. The federal government tells us what to do, where to go, and when to do it. And it's time for us to take that back. Getting to the crux of this legislation, the National Guard Defense Act of 1916 brought the state's militia under more federal control and federal funding and gave the president, the executive branch, the authority, in case of war or national emergency, to mobilize the National Guard. And since that time, the term militia and National Guard have become interchangeable. The National Guard is part of the militia, and the militia is the National Guard. The National Guard, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution, which is the militia clause, it states that the militia may be called forth to repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the law of the land. And that last part, the law of the land, is what we're here to talk about today in the Defend the Guard legislation. Since 1941, Congress has willfully given away their duty and responsibility. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, like Representative Aylward mentioned, is the enumerated powers clause where Congress, and Congress only, was given the authority to declare war and to change the state of peace to war. To be clear, this legislation is an admonition to all in Washington, D.C., that any troops should not be committed to war without a declaration of war. The president has the ability to respond to immediate threats, and it's called the War Powers Act, but that's been abused and misused for years. We believe a declaration of war is required for any troops, and the result of the abdication of power that Congress has participated in is endless and forever wars. Wars without declaration go on forever and ever. Congress doesn't want to have to answer for a declaration of war. They don't want to have to go back to their constituents, their neighbors, their friends, and their family in their home districts and explain to them why we're going into war again and why their sons and daughters are being committed to war. We've been fighting other people's wars because of entangled alliances, which we were warned against by George Washington in his final farewell address when he said, "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangled alliances with none." The National Guard has become the reserve component for the active duty military. That's a proper and necessary role of the National Guard. They should be a reserve component. They should be an auxiliary force for the active duty military. If we need to go to war, the National Guard should go fight and win our nation's wars and then return home. Now, to be clear, the National Guard can be called into federal service 2 different ways. Right? There's Title 32 and there's Title 10. Title 32 is generally for domestic and civil issues within the boundaries of the United States. It's usually federally funded and state-controlled in general. Some examples of this would be when the South Dakota National Guard is deployed to provide flood relief, or the California National Guard to provide forest fire relief, Or as we see today in Texas, the Texas National Guard responding to the Arctic blast that's caused so much death and destruction in our neighbors to the south. The other way to be called into federal service is what we're here to talk about today, and that's Title 10. Title 10 is primarily used to call the National Guard to participate in an armed conflict, war, humanitarian aid, or training outside of the United States of America. This has been addressed in the Supreme Court already. The Montgomery Amendment, which passed in 1984, was an amendment that was created because several governors, including the governor to our northeast, Governor Perpich of Minnesota, objected to President Ronald Reagan and his foreign policy in the Central American countries. President Reagan was sending National Guard engineer units down to Honduras to build roads as training missions. And the governors of the several states hated Dutch. They hated President Reagan. They hated everything about him. And so they opposed the use of their National Guard to build these roads, claiming incorrectly that the roads would be used for a U.S. military invasion into Central America and that the airstrips that they were building would be used for American military to invade that country. So the amendment passed. The Montgomery Amendment took away that ability for the governors to object to place or purpose in regards to training missions outside the country. The Supreme Court took this case up when Governor Perpich of Minnesota sued the Department of Defense, claiming that he had the ability to withhold his National Guard troops from leaving the country. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, said that is not correct. The President can call the National Guard to train outside of the United States for any purpose that the Commander-in-Chief sees fit. The Supreme Court was very clear about this. Training. It's in their opinion multiple times. The Purpose v. Department of Defense decision says that the federal government may authorize members of the National Guard to be ordered to active federal duty for purposes of training outside the United States without either a consent of the governor or the affected state or the declaration of national emergency. Now, it's important to remember that the Constitution is already clear on when the National Guard can go to war. It says that the National Guard can be called into federal service to put down an insurrection, repel an invasion, or to enforce the law of the land, and the Montgomery Amendment is now the law of the land. When Congress declares war, that declaration of war becomes the law of the land. With the declaration of war, the National Guard could and should be activated to go fight and win America's wars. The Supreme Court avoided opining on conflict and combat operations for the National Guard in the Perpich decision on purpose because it's already been addressed in the United States Constitution. If Congress wants our citizens in the South Dakota National Guard or the National Guard from Idaho or Texas or California or anywhere else, if they want our teachers, our tradesmen, our citizen soldiers, our legislators that serve, our brothers and sisters to go and fight in a declared war, then they should put their name on the line and declare war before we put our boots on the ground. Defend the Guard is a way for the states, for the people, to reclaim their power from the federal government. We are a federalist nation, and our founding fathers had it right, and the state of South Dakota has it right in your own motto, under God, the people rule. That's the way it was meant to be. In 2001, we were attacked, and we responded properly by sending our troops all over the world, especially in Afghanistan, to fight a war that hadn't been declared, but it was executed under an authorization of use of military force. We fast forward now to today. 85% of the members that signed that authorization of use of military force are not serving in Congress anymore. They've passed on, retired, or were defeated in elections. 85%, and it's never been revisited. This is not how it's supposed to work. The United States military is becoming empire builders, nation builders, peacekeepers, and the world's police. We know and we agree that Congress has the ability to raise armies. And the pace of the mission in the world right now for the United States military looks like this. We're in 150 nations with active duty military troops right now. 65 nations have counterterrorism training missions that are going on right now. 26 active military operations are being conducted today as we speak. 14 nations have troops in combat, direct fire combat. And 7 additional nations are getting drone strikes from the United States military today, all without a declaration of war. 5 years ago, West Virginia was the first state to produce a bill called Defend the Guard. In 5 years, it's made its way through committee and slowly gained a little bit of additional traction. But last year, it got out to a House floor vote, and it tied 50-50 in the West Virginia legislature. Due to COVID restraints, the legislature went sine die, and they convened, and it hasn't been taken up, and it will be again this year, though. For the record, every single person that attacked us on 9/11 is dead. Every single person that planned the attacks has been killed or captured. And in fact, some of them that had been captured have been returned back to their country and given their freedom, but we're still there fighting. In 2011, we killed Osama bin Laden, and the war should have ended. But unfortunately, we'd already taken our eye off the prize. We'd already started another war in Iraq 8 years earlier, and we were now fighting multiple wars in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, all across the African continent, and even the Philippines and the South Pacific. The National Guard is being used as the easy button to backfill the auxiliary, the active duty military. It's a role that is proper for them if war has been declared. We have allowed the runaway federal government, and we have allowed the runaway federal government, and we have allowed one person, one individual, the executive, to commit us to war. The National Guard.
I want to make sure we have enough time.
I'm about to wrap up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. The National Guard has been going into Afghanistan and has been propping up, through their actions, the warlords who run the opium trade. 90% of the world's opium is now produced in Afghanistan. There's a culture in Afghanistan called bachi bazi, where we are protecting the warlords there, and the warlords are known to have this pedophile culture where they have sex slaves, and we protect the warlords, but not the innocents. The National Guard is being used for things that shouldn't be used for. The South Dakota National Guard has my honor and my deepest respect because they are currently deployed, several hundred of them, to Djibouti, Africa right now, providing excellent combat support and oversight and medical care and training and facilities to the people of Africa and the other military members that are there serving. They're doing it well, they're doing it with distinction, and they're providing COVID relief and things like that to the African continent when they could be doing the same thing here in their state. In closing, I want to talk about just 1 second. At the height of the Greek Empire, Socrates was brought before a jury, and he was being accused of not recognizing the gods that the state recognized. And he argued that he was a gadfly that had to sting the steed and continually wake up the Athenian state, the government, and remind them what's the proper role of government. He was on trial for not recognizing the gods that the state recognized. Well, I don't recognize the gods that the state recognizes, the gods of perpetual war, the gods of war profiteering, the gods of the military-industrial complex, and I'm here to sting you, and I hope that you're here to sting the members of your congressional delegation in Washington, D.C., and encourage them to reclaim their war power authorities. I open my remarks by praising South Dakota, and I'm about done here. I praise South Dakota for being the #1 most veteran-friendly state in the nation. I'll close my remarks by saying this. Defend the Guard will protect that legacy and ensure that South Dakota National Guard veterans are not misused as political pawns in the endless war and undeclared wars, and that South Dakota can carry on that proud frontier heritage of being a very veteran-friendly state. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to stand before you. I'll stand for any questions that you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. McKnight.